It was a cold Friday evening in New York City. The kind of night where the wind cuts through your coat and makes you wish you had stayed home. But for 26-year-old Elena, staying home was never an option. She had bills to pay and a mother back in Venezuela who depended on every dollar she could send. Elena worked as a waitress at one of the fanciest restaurants in Manhattan. The place was called the Golden Oak. It had crystal chandeliers hanging from the ceiling, white tablecloths on every table, and prices so high that Elena could never afford to eat there herself. The people who came here were different from her. They wore watches that cost more than her yearly salary. They drove cars that she had only seen in magazines, and most of them looked right through her like she did not exist. But Elena never complained. She smiled at every customer. She refilled glasses before anyone had to ask. She memorized orders without writing them down. She was good at her job, and she needed this job more than anything. That Friday night started like any other. The restaurant was fully booked. Elena was assigned to the private dining section at the back, where the most important guests were seated. Her manager, a thin man named Mr. Hoffman, pulled her aside before the shift started. "Listen carefully," he said in a low voice. "Tonight we have a very special guest. His name is Vincent Aldridge. He is one of the richest men in this city. Real estate, hotels, you name it. The man is worth hundreds of millions. He is hosting a dinner for some big investors, and everything has to be perfect. Do you understand?" Elena nodded. "Yes, sir. I understand." "Good. No mistakes tonight." "Not a single one." Elena took a deep breath and walked toward the private section. She had dealt with wealthy customers before. Some of them were kind. Some of them barely noticed her, but every now and then, she would meet someone who seemed to enjoy making her feel small. She hoped tonight would not be one of those nights. She was wrong. Vincent Aldridge arrived at exactly 7 o'clock. He was a tall man in his 50s with silver hair and a perfectly tailored suit. He walked into the restaurant like he owned the place, and honestly, Elena thought, he probably could buy it if he wanted to. Behind him came a group of 11 other people, all dressed in expensive clothes, all laughing at something Vincent had just said. Elena greeted them with her best smile. "Good evening. Welcome to the Golden Oak. Please follow me to your table." Vincent did not look at her. He did not say thank you. He simply walked past her, like she was a piece of furniture. The others followed, still laughing among themselves. Elena led them to the large round table that had been specially prepared for the occasion. Fresh flowers sat in the center. The silverware was polished until it sparkled. Everything was perfect. As everyone took their seats, Elena began pouring water into their glasses. She moved carefully, making sure not to spill a single drop, but as she reached Vincent's glass, he suddenly turned in his chair, and his elbow bumped into her arm. A few drops of water landed on the tablecloth. It was barely noticeable. Just a tiny wet spot that would dry in minutes. But Vincent looked at it like she had committed a crime. "What is this?" he said loudly, pointing at the spot. Elena felt her heart skip. "I am so sorry, sir. It was just a small accident. Let me get you a fresh tablecloth right away." "A fresh tablecloth?" Vincent repeated, his voice dripping with sarcasm. He turned to his guests with a dramatic look of disbelief. "Did you hear that? She spills water on my table and thinks a fresh tablecloth will fix it." The guests chuckled nervously. Some of them looked uncomfortable, but no one said anything. Elena kept her voice calm. "Sir, I truly apologize. It will not happen again." Vincent leaned back in his chair and looked at her for the first time, but there was no warmth in his eyes. Only amusement, like a cat playing with a mouse. "Tell me something," he said. "How long have you been working here?" 3 years, sir. 3 years. He nodded slowly. "And in 3 years, this is the best you can do? Spill water on paying customers?" Elena felt the heat rising to her cheeks. The other guests at the table were watching now. Some of them were smirking. Others looked away, pretending to study their menus. "I apologize again, sir," Elena said quietly. "May I take your drink orders?" Vincent waved his hand dismissively. "Fine. Bring us a bottle of the '94 Bordeaux. And try not to drop it." The table erupted in laughter. Elena forced a smile, nodded, and walked away. Her hands were shaking slightly, but she refused to let them see it. The rest of the hour was not much better. Every time Elena approached the table, Vincent found something new to criticize. The bread was too cold. The butter was too hard. The salad had too much dressing. Nothing she did was good enough. At one point, she accidentally brushed against the back of his chair while serving the appetizers. It was the lightest touch, barely anything at all. But Vincent acted like she had shoved him. "Can you not be more careful?" he snapped. "This is exactly why some people are meant to serve, and others are meant to succeed." The words hit Elena like a slap. She stood there for a moment, frozen, as the guests at the table laughed once again. She wanted to say something. She wanted to tell him that he had no idea who she was or what she had been through, but she stayed silent. She needed this job. She could not afford to lose it. So she swallowed her pride and continued working. As the evening went on, Elena noticed something in the corner of the restaurant. A grand piano. It was a beautiful instrument, black and shiny, sitting on a small raised platform near the windows. The restaurant usually hired professional musicians to play on weekends, but tonight, the piano sat empty. Vincent noticed it too. He stared at it for a moment, then turned to Elena with a strange look in his eyes. "Tell me, waitress," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Do you have any talents? Any skills beyond carrying plates and spilling water?" Elena hesitated. She did not know where this was going, but she could tell it was not anywhere good. "I am just here to serve you, sir," she said carefully. "That is not what I asked." Vincent pointed toward the piano. "Can you play that thing? Do you know what a piano even is?" More laughter from the table. Elena looked at the piano. Something stirred inside her chest. A memory. A feeling she had buried long ago. "Yes," she said softly. "I can play." Vincent's eyebrows shot up in mock surprise. He looked around at his guests, his face full of amusement. "Did you hear that? Our little waitress says she can play the piano." He clapped his hands together like a child who had just been given a new toy. "Well then, this I have to see. Go on. Play something for us. Entertain us." Elena stood completely still. The entire restaurant seemed to have gone quiet. Other diners at nearby tables were watching now, curious about what was happening. Mr. Hoffman appeared from nowhere, his face pale with worry. He gave Elena a small shake of his head, warning her not to do anything foolish. But Elena was not looking at him. She was looking at the piano. And for the first time in 10 years, she felt something she thought she had lost forever. She felt ready. Without saying a word, she set down her serving tray and began walking toward the piano. Behind her, she could hear Vincent laughing and whispering to his guests. He had no idea what was about to happen. None of them did. What Vincent Aldridge did not know, what nobody in that restaurant knew, was that Elena had a secret. A secret she had carried with her for 10 long years. A secret that had shaped her entire life. Elena was not always a waitress. She was not always struggling to pay rent in a tiny apartment in Queens. There was a time when her name was known across concert halls in South America. There was a time when people called her a genius. It all started in Caracas, Venezuela, in a small house with a leaking roof and thin walls. Elena was born into a family that had very little money but a lot of love. Her father worked as a mechanic, fixing old cars for whatever people could pay him. Her mother cleaned houses for wealthy families on the other side of the city. They barely had enough to get by, but they always made sure Elena had food on her plate and shoes on her feet. When Elena was 4 years old, something happened that changed everything. Her mother worked for a rich family who had a grand piano in their living room. One day, she brought little Elena to work with her, because there was no one else to watch her. While her mother cleaned the kitchen, Elena wandered into the living room and saw the piano for the first time. She had never seen anything like it. It was big and black and shiny, and when she pressed one of the keys, it made the most beautiful sound she had ever heard. She pressed another key, and another. Before she knew it, she was sitting on the bench, her tiny fingers moving across the keys like they had always belonged there. The owner of the house, an elderly woman named Mrs. Delgado, heard the music and came to see what was happening. She expected to find a mess, maybe a broken vase or a spilled drink. Instead, she found a 4-year-old girl playing a simple melody on her piano, a melody the child had somehow figured out all by herself. Mrs. Delgado was stunned. She had been a music teacher for 40 years. She had seen many talented children in her life, but she had never seen anything like this. She called Elena's mother into the room. "Your daughter," she said, her voice shaking with emotion, "has a gift. A rare gift. You must not let it go to waste." From that day on, Mrs. Delgado gave Elena free piano lessons every week. She taught her how to read music, how to understand rhythm, how to feel the notes instead of just playing them. And Elena learned fast. Faster than anyone Mrs. Delgado had ever taught. By the time Elena was 6, she could play pieces that most teenagers struggled with. By the time she was 8, she was performing with the Venezuelan National Symphony Orchestra. The newspapers called her a child prodigy. They said she was a once-in-a-generation talent. They said she would one day be one of the greatest pianists in the world. And Elena believed them. She practiced for hours every day, sometimes forgetting to eat because she was so lost in the music. The piano was not just an instrument to her. It was her best friend. It was her escape. It was the only place where she felt truly free. When Elena was 12, something incredible happened. She received a letter from the Curtis Institute of Music in Philadelphia. It was one of the most famous music schools in the entire world. They accepted less than 4% of everyone who applied, and they were offering Elena a full scholarship. Her parents cried when they read the letter. They could not believe it. Their daughter, the girl from the house with the leaking roof, was going to study in America. She was going to have a future they could never have dreamed of. Elena moved to Philadelphia and started her new life. The school was everything she had hoped for. The teachers were brilliant. The other students were talented. And for the first time, Elena felt like she was exactly where she was meant to be. But life has a way of breaking the things we love most. When Elena was 16, she received a phone call from her father. His voice was shaking, and she knew immediately that something was wrong. "It is your mother," he said. "She is sick. Very sick." Elena flew back to Venezuela the next day. When she saw her mother lying in that hospital bed, thin and pale and barely able to speak, her heart shattered into 1,000 pieces. The doctors said it was a rare autoimmune disease. Her mother's own body was attacking itself, and without treatment, she would not survive. The treatment existed, but it was expensive. More expensive than anything Elena's family could afford. The doctors gave them a number, and when Elena saw it, she felt like the ground had disappeared beneath her feet. It would take everything they had, and even then, it would not be enough. Elena made a decision that night. A decision that would change the course of her life forever. She called the Curtis Institute and told them she was not coming back. Her teachers begged her to stay. They said she was throwing away her future. They said there had to be another way. But Elena knew there was no other way. Her mother needed her. And nothing else mattered. She dropped out of school and started working. She took any job she could find. She worked at diners, hotels, cleaning services, catering companies. She worked double shifts, sometimes triple shifts. Every dollar she earned went straight to her mother's medical bills. The years passed. 1 year, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years. Elena's mother slowly got better. The treatments were working. But by the time she was finally in remission, Elena's dreams had slipped away. She was no longer the child prodigy everyone had talked about. She was just another waitress in New York City, invisible to the world. She had not touched a piano in all those years, not once. Every time she saw one, it hurt too much. It reminded her of everything she had given up. The concerts she would never play, the stages she would never stand on, the life she would never have. So she buried that part of herself deep inside. She told herself it was over. She told herself to move on. She told herself that some dreams are just not meant to come true. But dreams do not die so easily. They wait. They hide in the corners of your heart, quiet and patient, hoping for one more chance. And now, as Elena walked toward the grand piano in the golden oak, she felt those old dreams waking up. She felt them stirring inside her chest, stretching after a long sleep. Her hands were trembling. Her heart was beating so fast she could hear it in her ears. Behind her, Vincent Aldridge was still laughing, still making jokes at her expense. He thought this was going to be the funniest thing he had ever seen. A waitress trying to play the piano. How embarrassing. How pathetic. He had no idea who he was dealing with. Elena reached the piano and stood in front of it. She ran her fingers lightly across the top, feeling the smooth, cool surface. It had been so long, so very long. She sat down on the bench. The leather was soft beneath her. The keys stretched out in front of her like an old friend she had not seen in years. The restaurant had gone completely silent. Every single person was watching her. The other waiters. The diners. Mr. Hoffman, who looked like he was about to have a heart attack, and Vincent Aldridge, who was leaning back in his chair with a smug smile on his face, waiting for her to fail. Elena closed her eyes. She thought about her mother. She thought about the sacrifice. She thought about all the nights she had cried herself to sleep, wondering if she had made the right choice. And then she thought about the music. The music that had never really left her. The music that had been waiting inside her all along. She placed her fingers on the keys, and she began to play. The first note came out soft and uncertain, like a whisper, like someone testing their voice after years of silence. Elena kept her eyes closed. Her fingers rested on the keys, and for a moment, she was not sure she could do this. It had been 10 years. 10 years since she had played anything. What if she had forgotten? What if her hands no longer remembered what to do? Behind her, she heard Vincent Aldridge chuckle. "This should be good," he said to his guests. A few of them laughed along with him, but Elena did not hear them. Not really. Because something was happening inside her. Something she had not felt in a very long time. She pressed another key. Then another. The notes started to come together. Slowly at first, like raindrops before a storm, her fingers began to move on their own, finding their way across the keyboard like they had never left. She was playing Chopin. Ballade No. 1, in G minor. It was one of the most beautiful and most difficult pieces ever written for piano. She had learned it when she was 14, back when the world still believed she would become one of the greats. Back when everything seemed possible. The music filled the restaurant. It started quietly, gently, like a sad memory floating through the air. The notes were delicate and tender, full of longing and loss. Elena played with her whole heart, pouring 10 years of pain and sacrifice into every single key. At Vincent's table, the laughter stopped. One of his guests, a woman in a red dress, put down her wine glass and turned toward the piano. Her eyes went wide. She had studied music in college. She knew what she was hearing, and she could not believe it. "Vincent," she whispered. "Vincent, listen." But Vincent was already listening. His smug smile had faded. His eyebrows were pulled together in confusion. This was not what he had expected. This was not what he had expected at all. The music grew stronger. Elena's fingers moved faster now, dancing across the keys with a skill that seemed almost impossible. The melody rose and fell like waves in the ocean, sometimes crashing with power, sometimes pulling back with heartbreaking softness. Other diners in the restaurant began to notice. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Forks were set down on plates. People turned in their chairs to see where this incredible sound was coming from. A young couple near the window held hands and stared at Elena with tears forming in their eyes. An old man sitting alone at a corner table closed his eyes and let the music wash over him, a peaceful smile spreading across his face. A little girl who had come with her parents tugged on her mother's sleeve and pointed at the piano, her mouth hanging open in wonder. Even the kitchen staff came out to watch. They stood in the doorway, still wearing their aprons, completely frozen. One of the cooks, a big man who rarely showed any emotion, wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. Mr. Hoffman stood near the entrance, his face pale, his hands gripping the edge of a table. He had managed this restaurant for 15 years. He had seen famous musicians perform on that very piano, but he had never heard anything like this. Not once. Elena was lost in the music now. She was no longer in the restaurant. She was back in Caracas, in Mrs. Delgado's living room, playing for the first time. She was in Philadelphia, practicing late into the night while her roommates slept. She was in the hospital, holding her mother's hand, making the hardest decision of her life. All of it came through in the music. Every joy, every sorrow, every moment of hope, and every moment of despair. It was all there, written in the notes, spoken through her fingers. The piece reached its climax. Elena's hands flew across the keyboard in a blur of motion. The sound was massive now, filling every corner of the room, shaking the crystal chandeliers, vibrating through the floor. It was powerful and overwhelming and absolutely magnificent. And then, just as suddenly as it had grown, the music began to soften. The storm was passing. The waves were calming. Elena played the final phrases with such tenderness that it felt like a goodbye, like a letter to someone she had loved and lost. The last note hung in the air for what felt like an eternity. Then it faded into silence. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The entire restaurant was frozen in place, caught in the spell of what they had just witnessed. Elena opened her eyes. She took a slow breath. Her hands were shaking, but this time it was not from fear. It was from something else. Something that felt like release, like freedom. She stood up from the piano bench and turned to face the room. And then, the applause began. It started with the woman in the red dress at Vincent's table. She rose to her feet and began clapping, her eyes glistening with tears. Then the young couple by the window joined in, then the old man in the corner. Then everyone else. Within seconds, the entire restaurant was on its feet. People were clapping and cheering and wiping their eyes. Some of them were openly crying. The sound of the applause was almost as loud as the music had been. Elena stood there, overwhelmed, not knowing what to do. She had not expected this. She had not expected any of this. She had only wanted to prove that she was more than what Vincent Aldridge thought she was. She had only wanted to show him that he was wrong about her. But this was something else entirely. This was not just applause. This was recognition. This was the world finally seeing who she really was. She looked over at Vincent's table. His guests were all standing, clapping along with everyone else. But Vincent himself was still in his chair. He had not moved. He had not made a sound. His face was pale. His mouth was slightly open. His eyes were fixed on Elena, with an expression she had never seen before. It was not anger. It was not embarrassment. It was something deeper than that. It was shame. For the first time in his life, Vincent Aldridge had nothing to say. All the money in the world, all the power, all the success, and he could not produce a single word. He just sat there, staring at the woman he had mocked and humiliated. The woman he had called a nobody. The woman who had just delivered one of the most stunning piano performances anyone in that room had ever heard. Elena did not gloat. She did not smile in triumph. She simply looked at him for a long moment, her expression calm and steady. Then she walked back to his table, picked up her serving tray, and spoke in a quiet, polite voice. "Would you like me to refill your water now, sir?" Vincent did not answer. He could not answer. He just stared at her, his face frozen in disbelief. One of his guests, a man with gray hair and kind eyes, let out a short laugh. Not a mocking laugh, an amazed one. "Young lady," he said, shaking his head slowly. "Who in the world are you?" Elena gave him a small smile. "I am just a waitress, sir. Is there anything else I can get for you?" But they all knew that was not true. After what they had just witnessed, they all knew that Elena was something far more than just a waitress. She was a star that had been hidden in the shadows. And tonight, for the first time in 10 years, she had finally stepped back into the light. The applause continued as Elena walked away from the table, her head held high, her heart beating with something she had almost forgotten how to feel: hope. The rest of that evening passed in a blur. Elena continued her work, taking orders and serving food like nothing had happened. But everything had changed. She could feel it in the way people looked at her now. Before, she had been invisible. Now, every eye in the restaurant followed her wherever she went. Guests at other tables stopped her to say how beautiful her playing was. Some of them pressed tips into her hand, far more than she had ever received before. One elderly woman grabbed her arm gently and said with tears in her eyes, "My dear, you have a gift from God. Please do not waste it." Elena thanked them all with a humble smile, but inside, her emotions were spinning. She did not know what to feel. Part of her was proud. Part of her was scared, and part of her was sad, because that performance had opened a door she had kept locked for 10 years, and now all the memories were flooding back. At Vincent's table, the mood had completely shifted. His guests were no longer laughing at his jokes or hanging on his every word. They were quiet, thoughtful, stealing glances at Elena whenever she passed by. The woman in the red dress kept shaking her head in disbelief, whispering to the person next to her. Vincent himself barely touched his food. He sat in silence, staring at his plate, his face still pale. For a man who always had something to say, his silence spoke louder than any words. When the dinner finally ended, the guests began to leave. Most of them stopped by the piano on their way out, running their fingers across the keys like it was something sacred now. A few of them asked Mr. Hoffman about Elena, wanting to know her name, her story, anything he could tell them, but it was the woman in the red dress who did something that would change Elena's life forever. Her name was Mrs. Reyes, and she was not just any guest. She was the founder of a major charitable foundation that supported arts education for underprivileged children. She had spent her life helping young people discover their talents, and she had an eye for spotting greatness. Before leaving, she walked up to Elena, who was clearing dishes from an empty table. "Excuse me," Mrs. Reyes said softly. Elena looked up. "Yes, ma'am? Is there something I can get for you?" Mrs. Reyes smiled warmly. "No, dear. I just wanted to speak with you for a moment." She paused, studying Elena's face. "That performance tonight. It was extraordinary. I have attended concerts at the finest halls in the world, and I have rarely heard anything that moved me the way your playing did." Elena felt her cheeks flush. "Thank you. That is very kind of you to say. It is not kindness, it is the truth." Mrs. Reyes tilted her head slightly. "May I ask where you studied?" Elena hesitated. She had not spoken about her past in years, but something about this woman made her feel safe. "I studied at the Curtis Institute, in Philadelphia, a long time ago." Mrs. Reyes's eyes widened. Curtis was one of the most prestigious music schools in the world. Getting accepted there was harder than getting into most Ivy League universities. "Curtis," she repeated slowly. "And yet you are working here as a waitress. May I ask why?" Elena looked down at the dishes in her hands. The memories came rushing back. Her mother in the hospital bed. The impossible choice. The years of sacrifice. "My mother was very sick," she said quietly. "She needed treatment that we could not afford, so I left school to work, to help pay for her care." Mrs. Reyes was silent for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice was thick with emotion. "You gave up your dreams to save your mother." "She is my mother," Elena said simply. "There was no choice to make." Mrs. Reyes reached into her purse and pulled out a small card. She pressed it into Elena's hand. "My foundation is hosting a charity gala next month. We bring together some of the most influential people in the arts world. I would be honored if you would perform." Elena stared at the card in disbelief. "Me? Perform at your gala?" "Yes, you." Mrs. Reyes squeezed her hand gently. "The world needs to hear you play. What happened here tonight should not stay in this restaurant. It should be shared with everyone." Elena did not know what to say. Her hands were trembling again. But this time it was from shock, from hope, from the feeling that maybe, just maybe, her story was not over after all. "I do not know if I can," she whispered. "It has been so long. You played tonight like you had never stopped, Mrs. Reyes said firmly. "The music is still inside you. It never left." She smiled and stepped back. "Think about it. Call me when you are ready." And with that, she walked out of the restaurant, leaving Elena standing there with a business card in her hand and 1,000 thoughts racing through her mind. The next few weeks were some of the most difficult of Elena's life. She went back and forth 100 times, trying to decide what to do. Part of her wanted to call Mrs. Reyes immediately and say yes, but another part of her was terrified. What if she was not good enough anymore? What if that night at the restaurant was just a fluke? What if she got on that stage and failed in front of everyone? She almost threw the card away twice, but each time, something stopped her. A voice in the back of her mind that sounded a lot like her mother. "You did not come this far to give up now." 3 weeks after that night at the Golden Oak, Elena picked up her phone and made the call. The gala was held at a grand hotel in Manhattan. The ballroom was filled with wealthy donors, famous musicians, art collectors, and journalists. Elena had never seen so many important people in one place. She stood backstage, wearing a simple black dress she had bought with her savings. Her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst. When they called her name, she walked onto the stage on shaking legs. The spotlight was blinding. The audience was just a sea of shadows beyond the light. She sat down at the piano, a magnificent Steinway that probably cost more than everything she had ever owned combined. For a moment, she froze. The fear was overwhelming. She could not breathe. She could not think. She wanted to run, but then she thought about her mother. She thought about all the years of sacrifice. She thought about that little girl in Caracas who had fallen in love with music and had never stopped loving it. Even when life tried to take it away, she placed her fingers on the keys, and she played. The performance was even better than the one at the restaurant. Elena played for 20 minutes, moving through pieces by Chopin, Liszt, and Debussy. The audience sat in stunned silence, completely captivated. When she finished, the applause was deafening. People rose to their feet. Some of them were crying. What happened next was something Elena could never have predicted. Someone in the audience had recorded her performance on their phone. They posted it online that night with a simple caption: "A waitress who gave up her dreams to save her mother just performed at a charity gala." This is what sacrifice and talent look like. By morning, the video had been viewed over 1 million times. By the end of the week, it had reached 14 million. News outlets picked up the story. Journalists wanted interviews. Her name was everywhere. And then, one afternoon, Elena received a phone call that made her sit down and cry. It was from an old man with a gentle voice. He said his name was Maestro Coronel. He had been the conductor of the Venezuelan National Symphony Orchestra. He was the man who had first put Elena on a stage when she was just 8 years old. "I saw the video," he said, his voice cracking with emotion. "I could not believe it. We all thought we had lost you, Elena. We thought you had disappeared forever." Elena wiped her tears. "I never disappeared," she said softly. "I was just waiting." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. And then, the maestro said something that changed everything. "Then stop waiting, my child. The world is ready for you now." 6 months later, Elena stood backstage at Carnegie Hall, wearing a long black gown that flowed around her like water. Her hair was styled beautifully. Her makeup was perfect. She looked like a completely different person from the waitress who had served dinner at the Golden Oak all those months ago. But inside, she was still the same Elena. The same girl from Caracas who had fallen in love with music at 4 years old. The same daughter who had given up everything to save her mother. The same woman who had spent 10 years in the shadows, wondering if she would ever find her way back to the light. Tonight, the whole world would be watching. The concert had sold out in 11 minutes. 11 minutes. Elena still could not believe it. When the tickets went on sale, people had crashed the website trying to buy them. News stations had covered the story for days. The New York Times had called it the most anticipated classical music event of the decade. Everyone wanted to see the waitress who had stunned a millionaire into silence. Everyone wanted to hear the woman who had sacrificed her dreams and then found them again. Elena peeked through the curtain at the audience. The seats were filled with people in elegant clothes, talking quietly among themselves. Waiting for the show to begin, she saw famous musicians she had admired since childhood. She saw critics who could make or break a career with a single review. She saw cameras from television networks around the world. And in the front row, she saw the person who mattered most. Her mother. She had flown in from Venezuela 2 days ago. It was her first time ever leaving the country. When Elena had picked her up at the airport, they had held each other and cried for what felt like hours. Her mother looked older now, thinner, but her eyes were bright and full of life. The treatments had worked. She was healthy. She was here. "I am so proud of you," her mother had whispered into her ear. "You gave up so much for me. And look at you now. Look at what you have become." Elena had shaken her head. "I did not become anything, Mama. I just remembered who I always was." Now, standing backstage with 5 minutes until showtime, Elena felt the familiar wave of fear wash over her. It was the same fear she had felt at the Golden Oak. The same fear she had felt at the charity gala. The fear that she was not good enough. The fear that she would fail. But she had learned something important over the past 6 months. Fear never really goes away. It just gets quieter when you stop letting it control you. She took a deep breath and closed her eyes. She thought about her journey. The little house in Caracas with the leaking roof, Mrs. Delgado, and her free piano lessons. The scholarship to Curtis. The phone call about her mother. The 10 years of working double shifts. The night at the restaurant when everything changed. Every moment had led her here. Every sacrifice. Every tear. Every sleepless night. It had all been worth it. A stagehand appeared beside her. "Miss, it is time." Elena opened her eyes and nodded. She smoothed down her dress, lifted her chin, and walked toward the stage. The moment she stepped into the spotlight, the audience erupted into applause. They were clapping before she had even played a single note. Elena felt the warmth of their support wash over her. And for the first time that night, she smiled. She walked to the piano, a stunning Steinway grand that gleamed under the lights. She sat down on the bench and adjusted her position. The applause slowly faded into silence. Thousands of people held their breath, waiting. Elena looked out at the audience. She found her mother's face in the front row. Her mother was already crying, pressing a tissue to her eyes. But she was smiling too. The biggest smile Elena had ever seen. Elena placed her fingers on the keys, and then she played. She started with Chopin. The same piece she had played at the restaurant. But this time, it was different. This time, she was not playing to prove anything to anyone. She was playing because she loved it. Because the music was part of her soul. Because this was who she was meant to be. The notes filled Carnegie Hall like sunlight filling a dark room. They soared up to the ceiling and floated back down like gentle rain. They wrapped around the audience and held them close. People closed their eyes and let themselves be carried away by the beauty of it all. Elena played for nearly an hour. She moved through piece after piece, each one more stunning than the last. She played Liszt and Debussy and Rachmaninoff. She played a Venezuelan folk song that her mother used to sing to her when she was a child. She played with everything she had, leaving nothing behind. When she finally lifted her hands from the keys, there was a moment of perfect silence. The kind of silence that only comes when something truly magical has happened. And then the audience exploded. People leaped to their feet. They clapped and cheered and shouted. Some of them were crying openly, not even trying to hide their tears. The applause went on and on, wave after wave, filling the hall with a sound almost as beautiful as the music itself. Elena stood and bowed. She looked at her mother, who was on her feet with everyone else, clapping so hard her hands must have hurt. Their eyes met across the crowded hall, and in that moment, no words were needed. They both understood. Everything they had been through, all the pain and sacrifice, had brought them to this perfect moment. After the concert, Elena was surrounded by people wanting to congratulate her. Famous musicians shook her hand. Critics praised her performance. Reporters asked for interviews. It was overwhelming and wonderful and completely surreal. But there was one more surprise waiting for her. As the crowd began to thin out, a man in a dark suit approached her. He looked nervous, uncomfortable, like he was not sure he should be there. It took Elena a moment to recognize him. It was Vincent Aldridge. He looked different than she remembered. Smaller somehow. The arrogance that had defined him that night at the restaurant was gone. In its place was something that looked almost like humility. "Miss Elena," he said quietly. "I do not know if you remember me." "I remember you," Elena said calmly. Vincent nodded slowly. He looked down at his shoes for a moment, then back up at her face. "I came here tonight because I needed to see you. And I needed to say something to you." He paused, struggling with the words. "I am sorry for how I treated you that night, for the things I said, for trying to humiliate you in front of everyone." Elena watched him carefully but said nothing. "I have thought about that night every single day since it happened," Vincent continued. "I was cruel to you. I was cruel because I thought my money made me better than everyone else. But you showed me how wrong I was. You showed me that true worth has nothing to do with wealth." He reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope. "I have started a foundation. It provides scholarships to young musicians who cannot afford to study. I named it after you. After your story." He held out the envelope. "This is not about forgiveness. I know I do not deserve that. This is just my way of trying to become a better person. Because of you." Elena looked at the envelope for a long moment. Then she looked at Vincent. She saw the shame in his eyes, the regret, the genuine desire to change. She took the envelope and nodded. "Growth is the greatest apology," she said softly. "Thank you for showing me that people can change." Vincent's eyes filled with tears. He nodded once, then turned and walked away. Elena watched him go. Then she turned and found her mother waiting for her by the stage door. She walked over and took her mother's hand. "Are you ready to go home?" her mother asked. Elena smiled and shook her head. "I am already home, Mama. I have been home since the moment I sat down at that piano." They walked out into the cool night air together, mother and daughter, their hearts full of gratitude and hope. Behind them, the lights of Carnegie Hall glowed against the dark sky. Elena had given up her dreams once to save the person she loved most. And in return, life had given her something even greater, a second chance, and this time, she was never letting go.